If I asked you to picture like a gym for your brain, what immediately pops into your head? Be honest.
I know exactly where you're going with this. You're setting a trap.
Maybe. But I'm guessing for most people, it's Sudoku puzzles. Or maybe sitting down to learn a new language, really struggling with, I don't know, French verb conjugation?
Oh, don't.
And this is the big one right now, it's those apps on your phone, the ones with the little colorful bubbles that promise to, like, raise your IQ if you just tap them fast enough.
Right. The whole brain training industry.
Yeah.
It's a billion-dollar market built on this idea that if you sort of gamify cognitive effort, you get smarter.
Exactly. We're completely obsessed with this idea of working out our minds in this very active, almost frantic way. But what if I told you that the most rigorous, data-backed training for the machinery of your mind involves, well, doing absolutely nothing,
Hmm.
or at least appearing to do nothing?
It is the classic paradox. And I think it seems to trip everyone up when they first encounter this research. We look at a meditator and we just see stillness.
Yeah.
We see someone sitting on a cushion, maybe their eyes are closed, hands on their knees, looking very peaceful. But if you could actually look at the data, and the hard neurocognitive data, what's happening under the hood is it's an intense, active process of regulation. It is heavy lifting.
And that is exactly why I am so excited about the stack of research we are unpacking today. We really need to set the ground rules early for you listening. We are not talking about incense today. We are not talking about spiritual enlightenment or chakras or, finding your inner bliss.
No, we are strictly looking at the mechanics. This is a deep dive into the science of what you could call mental training. We're treating the brain as a biological machine that can, in fact, be tuned.
And the sources you've pulled, this isn't just like a blog post from some wellness influencer who went to an ashram once.
Definitely not, no. We have a massive meta-analysis, and when I say massive, I really mean it's a review of 111 randomized controlled trials.
Wow.
Covering over 9,500 participants, and it's specifically looking at cognitive function.
So it's basically asking the question, does meditation actually make you smarter?
Exactly. That's the Zainal and Newman paper from Health Psychology Review. It's a real heavyweight piece of research.
Right.
It moves us past the anecdotal, oh, I feel better, and into the cold, hard statistics.
Okay. And then we have a systematic review on the software of the mind, specifically how we handle that buggy code we all have called rumination, and how something called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy might actually outperform medication in some cases.
Right, that's the way it all study, which is crucial for understanding the how. How do we actually debug the mental loops that can lead to depression?
They were also going to look at a review from the European Cardiology Review, which asks if this mental work can physically fix a broken heart. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
the pump in your chest.
Yeah.
And finally, we have evidence that was submitted to the UK Parliament regarding public health policy. So we're going from individual neurons all the way up to national policy.
It's the full spectrum. It's from the microscope to the macroscope, really.
Yeah. But before we get into the weeds, you dropped a breadcrumb when we were prepping for this. You mentioned a finding in the cognitive data that just completely flipped my understanding of brain power.
Right.
I always thought smarter meant faster.
Right.
If you're smart, you solve the problem quickly.
And that's the assumption most of us make. It's totally natural. We live in a world that values speed above almost everything else. But the data on mindfulness suggests something, fascinating. It doesn't necessarily make your brain faster.
Oh.
In fact, on some measures, speed doesn't change at all. What it does is make you significantly more accurate.
That is such a tease. It's like saying, I can't make you a sprinter, but I can make sure you never trip.
Precisely.
Mm.
And in a complex world, not tripping is often a lot more valuable than raw speed.
Okay, I really want to get to that because that feels like a huge paradigm shift. But let's do this properly. Let's start with the hardware. Let's unpack this massive meta-analysis on cognitive function.
Let's do it.
So, 111 studies. First off, for you listening who might not be a stats nerd, why does the scale of this matter so much? Why isn't one study enough? We see headlines all the time that say, new study shows X.
Well, think about it like this. It's like movie reviews. If you read one review from one guy in Ohio, that's interesting, but it's biased. It's noisy.
Right.
Maybe he just had a bad day. Maybe he hates that genre of film. But if you look at the aggregate score, like on Rotten Tomatoes, which pulls together hundreds of reviews, you start to get a much clearer signal of whether the movie is actually good.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. You're filtering out all the outliers, all the weird random results.
Exactly. In psychology and neuroscience, Individual studies are notoriously noisy.
Yep.
Maybe you had a very small group of participants. Maybe they were all 19-year-old college students, which happens a lot in university research for obvious reasons.
Yeah, the classic Psych 101 pool.
Exactly. Maybe the control group wasn't great. A meta-analysis, especially one this size, covering almost 10,000 people, it aggregates all that data. It smooths out the noise to find the signal. If 111 different studies are all pointing in the same general direction, you can be much more confident that the effect is real and not just a statistical fluke.
So we have 9,500 people, and the researchers were looking at what they called mindfulness-based interventions, or MBIs. What exactly does that entail? Are we just talking about sitting and breathing? Because I know there are a million ways to meditate.
That's a great question. They break it down into two main types of mental mechanics. And this is important because it really helps explain why the brain changes. You have focused attention, or FA, and then you have open monitoring, or OM.
Okay, break those down for me. Let's start with focused attention.
So focused attention is what most people start with. It's kind of the bicep curl of meditation. You choose an anchor. Usually it's the sensation of the breath at the nostrils or maybe the rise and fall of the chest. And you just focus on it.
And your mind wanders.
Inevitably. Because it will. It
Yeah.
will think about lunch or an email you have to send or an itch on your nose. The practice is to catch it wandering, to notice that it's gone off. And then you gently bring it back. It's just a repetition of that cycle.
A catch and release.
Exactly. It's a repetitive lifting of the attention muscle. You are literally training the ability to direct your focus where you want it to go, rather than letting it be constantly pulled by whatever is shiniest or loudest in your environment.
Okay, and open monitoring. That sounds a bit more abstract.
It's a little more advanced, yeah. It's all about non-reactive awareness. So instead of focusing on one single thing like the breath to the exclusion of everything else,
Yeah.
you kind of open the aperture. You observe everything, thoughts, sounds, bodily sensations, without latching onto them.
So instead of focusing on just the water in the river, you're sitting on the bank and watching the whole river flow by.
That's a perfect analogy. You're watching the flow without jumping in. You notice the thought, I'm hungry. But you don't engage with it. You don't start planning dinner. You just note hunger and let it pass. It's a thought, not a command.
Okay, so they took people doing these practices, the bicep curls and the river watching, and they tested their brains. And the headline finding was about something they called global cognition.
Oh.
What did they find?
They found a small to moderate but statistically significant improvement in global cognition, which is basically the aggregate of how well your brain performs a whole battery of tasks.
Small to moderate sounds. Well, moderate, is that really worth the effort? I feel like if I'm going to sit still for 20 minutes a day, I want like massive gains.
I get that. But in the world of behavioral science,
Yeah.
a moderate effect size across nearly 10,000 people is actually a really big deal. It means there is a consistent, measurable upgrade happening. It's not a magic pill that turns you into Einstein overnight, but it is a reliable upgrade to your mental operating system. And here's where we go back to that teaser. The nuance is everything. They distinguish between accuracy and latency.
And latency being the fancy word for speed.
Yes. Reaction time.
Yeah.
How quickly can you press the button when the light turns green? Or how fast can you read that sentence? How quickly can you match the shape on the screen? And what the study found was that mindfulness had almost no effect on latency.
None.
It didn't make people faster processors.
Which is just so counterintuitive. We usually think high performance means fast. We talk about having quick wits or being slow as an insult.
Exactly. Our entire culture is built around speed and efficiency. But while the speed didn't move, the study found a really robust effect on accuracy. People made fewer errors.
This is where it gets really interesting to me. Because we are obsessed with efficiency, right? We want to hack our brains to do more things faster. But this suggests that mindfulness is training a completely different muscle. It's training the don't screw this up muscle.
Well, think about what mindfulness actually is. It is the practice of non-judgmental focus. It is prioritizing the process over the outcome. When you're rushing to get an answer, you're entirely outcome focused. You want the result now. And that makes you prone to impulsive errors. Mindfulness teaches you to inhabit the moment of the decision. It reduces that feeling of rush. So you might not answer the email faster, but you are much less likely to hit reply all. when you meant to hit reply.
Which, let's be honest, is a life-saving skill. I would trade 10% of my typing speed to never have a reprisal disaster again.
You too.
Or think about driving.
Driving is a great example. A fast reaction time is good, sure, but an accurate assessment of the threat is much, much better. If you react instantly but swerve into oncoming traffic, your speed didn't help you at all. Mindfulness seems to create this micro pause that allows the brain to select the correct response rather than just the fastest one.
So it's effectiveness over efficiency.
Precisely. And when they broke it down into specific cognitive domains, it gets even clearer. They found significant improvements in 3 very specific areas: executive attention, working memory accuracy, and inhibition accuracy.
Okay, let's break those down because those sound like the 3 pillars of adulting. Executive attention, what is that exactly?
Executive attention is your brain's ability to manage conflict. It's the ability to filter out distractions and maintain focus on a goal. Imagine you are in a crowded coffee shop trying to write an important report. The conversations around you, the clattering of cups, the little notification that just popped up on your phone, those are all competing for your attention.
It's the cocktail party effect, right? Trying to hear one voice in a room of 50.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not just external noise, it's also the internal noise. It's your own worry about your bills, it's your daydream about the weekend. Executive attention is basically the bouncer at the door of your mind, deciding what gets in and what gets blocked.
And the study showed that mindfulness beefs up the bouncer, makes him bigger.
Significantly. Which makes perfect sense, if you think about it. If you practice sitting in silence and bringing your attention back to your breath every single time it wanders to a car honking outside, or a random thought about a TV show, you are literally doing reps for your executive attention. You are training the bouncer to say, no, we are not listening to the car honk right now. We are listening to the breath, over and over again.
So when you sit down to work, you can actually work instead of getting distracted and tab switching every 30 seconds.
That's the practical application. You can hold the line against distraction much more effectively.
Okay, that makes sense. So next one, working memory. I always think of this as the RAM in a computer, the scratch pad of the mind.
That's the best way to describe it. It's the ability to hold information in your mind and manipulate it over a very short period, like doing mental math or remembering the beginning of this sentence by the time I get to the end of it, or, remembering a phone number just long enough to dial it.
And how does mindfulness help there? Does it just make the scratch pad bigger? Do I suddenly get more gigabytes of RAM in my head?
Not necessarily bigger, no, but much, much cleaner. The study found that MBIs specifically help with the updating function of working memory.
Updating, like refreshing a web page in your brain.
In a way, yeah. It's the ability to clear out old, irrelevant data to make room for new, relevant data.
Can you give me a real-life example of that?
Sure. Okay. Imagine you just finished a really stressful phone call with your bank. You were arguing about a fee, you were frustrated, you had all these numbers and dates in your head. You hang up, and now you have to walk immediately into a meeting with your boss to discuss a completely different project.
Yeah, that's a tough transition.
It is. And if your working memory is still holding on to the frustration, the numbers, and the arguments from that bank call, you have less processing power available for the meeting.
My RAM is clogged with the old program.
Exactly. You're lagging. Mindfulness seems to help you wipe the slate clean. It reduces the interference from the past task, what psychologists call proactive interference, so you have full capacity for the present task.
That is huge. I feel like my brain is constantly clogged with cached files from 3 days ago, let alone 3 minutes ago. So mindfulness is like clearing the cache.
Precisely. And the data shows this leads to better accuracy in working memory tasks. You aren't mixing up the new inputs with the old inputs because you've successfully let go of the old ones. You stop carrying the baggage of the last moment into this one.
And the third one, inhibition. This is the one I feel like I need the most. Probably we all do.
Inhibition is the ability to stop an autopilot response. It's the ability to not do something. It's seeing that notification on your phone and not clicking it. It's feeling a surge of anger and not shouting. It is the sacred pause.
So the study says mindfulness improves inhibition accuracy, which means it helps us refrain from those impulsive automatic reactions.
Yes. And this connects directly back to the focused attention, the FA practice we talked about. When you are meditating and you get an itch on your nose, the autopilot response is to scratch it immediately.
I can feel it just by you saying it. It's annoying. I want to scratch my nose right now.
Right. It demands action. But the instruction in meditation is often to just notice the itch, to observe it without reacting. You watch the sensation rise, peak, and eventually fade away on its own. And in doing that, You are training inhibition. You are breaking the hardwired link between the stimulus, the itch, and the response, the scratch.
That is such a powerful reframe. You aren't just sitting there suffering for no reason. You are actively training your brain to decouple stimulus and response. And that applies to everything: addiction, arguments, diet, procrastination.
It is the absolute foundation of self-regulation. If you can inhibit the tiny impulse to check your phone, you are strengthening the same neural machinery that allows you to inhibit the massive impulse to say something hurtful in an argument.
It's all the same muscle.
It uses the same neural circuits. You create a gap between the trigger and the action. And in that gap lies your freedom to choose.
In that gap lies your freedom.
I like that a lot.
Uh,
Now, to be fair to the skeptics, the study also mentioned what didn't improve. We talked about speed. But it also mentioned episodic memory and verbal fluency.
right. And we have to be honest about the limitations. Mindfulness is not a cure-all. Episodic memory is your ability to remember facts or events, like what you had for breakfast or who won the World Series in 1998. Verbal fluency is how many words, starting with the letter F, you can list in 1 minute.
And mindfulness didn't seem to move the needle on those at all.
Nope.
Why do you think that is? What's the theory?
Well, mindfulness is primarily about the present. It's about how you manage what's happening right now. Episodic memory is about retrieving the past. And verbal fluency is often about rapid retrieval speed. Since we know mindfulness doesn't boost processing speed, and it isn't a memory mnemonics trick, it's not a memory palace technique or anything like that.
It just makes sense that these specific domains aren't the primary beneficiaries. It enhances the control you have over your mind, not necessarily the size of the library in your mind.
That's a great distinction. It gives you better access to the library, maybe, but it doesn't add more books or make the librarian run faster.
Exactly. A better organized library, not a bigger one.
Now, before we move on to the software of the mind, I want to touch on the moderators in this study. In other words, who benefits the most? Because there was a really interesting finding about age and mental state.
Yes. So the good news is that it seems to work across the lifespan. Adults of all ages saw benefits. However, there was a little nuance there. Older adults saw slightly less benefit, specifically in working memory accuracy.
Okay, why would that be?
The theory is that working memory naturally declines quite steeply with age. It's a very biological function, very dependent on the prefrontal cortex, which changes as we get older. And it just might be harder to reverse that machinery later in life. But the other domains, the attention, the inhibition, those still improve significantly for older adults too.
Okay, and what about people who are already struggling? People with, say, anxiety or depression?
This is a crucial finding. The effects on global cognition were actually stronger in people with elevated psychiatric symptoms compared to healthy controls.
So if you are starting from a deficit, or if your mind is more chaotic to begin with, you actually have more to gain from this practice.
Exactly. If your baseline is a highly distracted, anxious mind, the delta, the amount of change you experience from training that regulation is just massive. It's like someone who has never exercised seeing rapid gains in the gym compared to an Olympian who's trying to shave 1/100th of a second off their time. If your mind is messy, mindfulness is a very powerful broom.
And there was one more moderator that I think is going to be a theme today. It's this idea of face-to-face versus apps.
Ah, yes, the delivery method. This was so interesting. The study found that face-to-face, instructor-led interventions had stronger effects on global cognition than the self-guided app-based ones.
That is tough to hear for those of us who rely on the little soothing voice in our headphones every morning. Why the difference? What's going on there?
Well, you can speculate, but a few things come to mind. Accountability, for one. Human connection. When you are in a room with an instructor and other people, you show up differently. You probably try harder.
You feel a bit of social pressure? In a good way.
In a good way. And there is also the nuance of feedback. An app can't see that you are trying too hard and tensing up, or that you are actually falling asleep, or that you are misunderstanding a core instruction. A human teacher can guide the quality of the attention in real time.
So apps are great for accessibility, for getting people in the door, but the human element might be the secret sauce for efficacy.
That seems to be what the data is pointing to here. You can't fully digitize a human process. We are social animals, and it seems we learn best when we learn together.
Okay, so we have established that the hardware gets an upgrade. We get better at filtering, better at updating, and better at stopping. Now let's talk about the software. Section 2. Debugging the mind. We are moving to this systematic review on rumination.
Rumination. It is such a mechanical-sounding word for something that feels so deeply emotional and personal.
It is, and the source defines it as an uncontrolled, recurrent pattern of dwelling on negative outcomes. It's the loop. It's lying in bed at 3 a.m. replaying that one awkward thing you said in a meeting 5 years
Oh,
ago.
that's the one. Or worrying about a future that hasn't happened yet. The review calls it a transdiagnostic symptom, and that's a key term. It means it shows up in almost everything: depression, anxiety, PTSD, eating disorders. It is the common thread of so much mental suffering. It's the engine that drives the car off the cliff.
It's the spin cycle from hell. You're just stuck in it. So, how does mindfulness fix this particular bug? The review looked at something called MBCT, which stands for Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy.
Right. And MBCT is really interesting because it was specifically designed to prevent relapse in people with recurrent depression. It combines traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, which looks at what you think, with mindfulness, which looks at how you relate to what you think.
A subtle but important difference. And what were the findings?
The meta-analysis of 29 RCTs showed that MBCT significantly reduces rumination. But here is the real kicker. When they compared it to other treatments, it was more effective than treatment as usual and wait lists, which, you would kind of expect.
Sure.
But it also showed superior effectiveness in some contexts compared to antidepressants.
Whoa! Let's just pause there for a second. Better than medication. That is a very bold claim.
And we have to be very careful with the nuance here. In the specific context of reducing rumination scores in some of these studies, yes. This does not mean throw away your meds. We are not doctors, and everyone's brain chemistry is different. Medication is absolutely life-saving for many, many people. But what it suggests is that for this specific symptom, this repetitive cognitive looping, this kind of mental training might target the root mechanism more directly than a chemical intervention alone can.
It's like it's treating the cause, not just dampening the feeling of the symptom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the study also found it was comparable to traditional CBT, right?
Yes, similar effectiveness to standard cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very high praise because CBT is considered the gold standard in talk therapy for a lot of these issues.
So how does it break the loop? If I'm stuck in a thought spiral, just telling me to breathe feels like bringing a water pistol to a forest fire. What is the actual mechanism? Why does it work?
So the review highlights three main gears in this engine. First, and most obviously, mindfulness interrupts the loop by shifting your focus to the present moment. Your mind literally can't be in the past and the present at the exact same time. But the second one is really interesting. Self-compassion.
This is one of those terms that can sound a little fluffy, but the data is saying it's hard science.
It absolutely is. Rumination is often fueled by a constant stream of self-criticism. Why am I like this? I'm such an idiot. I always mess up. Why can't I just be normal? That internal monologue is the fuel for the fire. MBCT explicitly trains self-compassion. It teaches you to replace that critical inner voice with a kinder, more understanding one.
So instead of having a drill sergeant yelling at you inside your head, it's more like a supportive coach.
Exactly. And if you stop beating yourself up for having the thought in the first place, the thought loses its power. It has nothing to grab onto. You starve the fire of oxygen.
And the third mechanism, this is the one you teased in the intro, this idea of decentering.
Decentering. If there is one concept that you take away from this deep dive today, let it be this one. Decentering is the ability to observe your thoughts and feelings as events in the mind rather than as objective truths or facts about who you are.
That sounds a little abstract. Can you give me a concrete example?
Okay, absolutely. So rumination says, I am a failure. That is a statement of fact. It defines you. It feels solid. It feels true. Decentering says, I am having the thought that I am a failure.
It sounds like such a small linguistic trick, but it feels completely different when you say it out loud.
It creates space. If I am a failure, I am trapped inside the box. If I am having a thought, I am now standing outside the box looking at it. The analogy often used is that you are the sky, and the thought is just a cloud. It might be a big, dark storm cloud, it might be heavy and full of rain, but it is not you, it's just weather, and weather passes.
And the meta-analysis confirms that MBCT actually boosts this ability. It makes you a better weather watcher.
Significantly. And this is very likely why it works so well for relapse prevention. The next time a depressive thought comes up, the person doesn't immediately spiral down into it. They recognize it. Ah, here's the I'm a failure story again. I know this one. I don't have to buy a ticket to this show. And they can let it go.
It's like you're becoming Spock instead of Kirk. You become the observer of the emotion, not the victim of it.
In a way, yes, you step out of the drama on the stage and into the audience. You can watch the play unfold without having to jump up there and get stabbed.
And does this effect last? Or is it something you have to keep taking the class for forever?
The review suggests the effects are sustained. They did follow-up periods up to 3 months and beyond, and they found that rumination levels stayed low. The analogy they use is muscle training. Once you learn how to ride a bike or once you build that core strength, you have a reserve. The cumulative effect protects you against the next hit. You fundamentally changed the default mode of your brain.
So we've upgraded the hardware with improved cognition. We've debugged the software by tackling rumination. Now let's look at the power supply. The heart, section 3, the heart of the matter.
This is where we turn to the European Cardiology Review. I want to set the tone here carefully. This is a field of what you call cautious optimism. The brain data we just discussed is very, very strong. The heart data is, well, it's mixed.
Right. And the premise itself is a bit of a leap, isn't it? Can sitting still and thinking about your breath actually fix a physical pump?
It does sound like a stretch, but we know the mind and body are connected. We know that chronic stress releases hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which constrict blood vessels and make the heart race. So theoretically, if you can reduce the stress, you should be able to help the heart.
Okay, so let's talk about the big one. Blood pressure. High BP is the silent killer. Did meditation lower it?
The answer is sometimes. The data is what researchers call heterogeneous. It means it's all over the place. Some trials in the review showed a massive drop, like a mean of 20 points, which is huge. That's drug-level effectiveness.
Yeah.
But others, like the big Harmony trial that's mentioned in the source, showed no significant benefit at all compared to the control groups.
Why is such a huge discrepancy? Why would it work so powerfully for some and not at all for others?
Well, it might be the type of intervention. The source notes that interventions that include physical movement like yoga seem to be more consistently effective for lowering blood pressure than seated meditation alone.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. You probably need to move the body to treat the body in a direct way.
Exactly. Sitting calmly is great for the mind and the nervous system, but the cardiovascular system itself also benefits from mechanical stimulation, from actually getting the blood pumping through exercise. So meditation is not a replacement for your blood pressure medication.
No.
But it might be a valuable link in the chain. It's part of the puzzle, not the whole solution.
However, there was one area in heart health where the evidence was surprisingly strong, and that was smoking cessation.
Yes, this was a real standout. Quitting smoking is arguably the single best thing a person can do for their heart health. And meditation seems to be a surprisingly powerful tool for helping people do it.
What's the mechanism? Is it just distracting yourself from the craving?
It seems to go much deeper than distraction. It goes right back to the brain science we talked about in Section 1. The review cited research by Tang et al. That suggests meditation increases activity in the anterior cingulate and the prefrontal cortex.
The self-control centers, the inhibition centers we were talking about earlier with the itch.
Correct. When a craving hits, that intense feeling of, I need a cigarette right now, that is a stimulus. The autopilot response, worn deep into the brain, is to light up. Meditation seems to strengthen that inhibition network, allowing the smoker to ride out the wave of the craving without acting on it.
It's the pause again.
It's the pause, it's the DAP. And it also works by reducing the stress that so often triggers the craving in the first place. So it hits the addiction from two sides. Less of a trigger and more self-control when the trigger does happen.
That is fascinating. So even if meditation doesn't magically unclog your arteries, if it helps you quit smoking, it has indirectly saved your life.
Precisely. It improves your compliance with healthy choices. It helps you stick to the plan.
The review also mentioned something about structural changes in the brainstem and cortex related to all this.
Yes, tissue augmentation, which means literally thickening the brain matter in key areas. This suggests that the physiological changes in the brain translate to better regulation of the autonomic nervous system. That's the system that controls your heart rate and your breathing. So there's a direct physiological link, even if the blood pressure data is messy. You are physically changing the control center that regulates your heart.
All right, let's move on to Section 4. We've looked at the individual, the brain, the mind, the heart. Now let's zoom out to the societal level, the big picture. We're looking at written evidence that was submitted to the UK Parliament by a group called the Mindfulness Initiative.
And this is a really important document because it bridges that gap between the science and actual policy. It's asking, okay, we have all this evidence, so how do we use it to save a healthcare system that is, frankly, drowning?
And the context here, as laid out in the report, is pretty grim. It highlights what it calls a crisis of dependency on prescription drugs.
It's a staggering figure. Nearly 1 million people in the context of this report had been using antidepressants for at least 3 years. And the implication is that many people with mild to moderate depression might be stuck in a cycle of dependency because they don't have access to other tools.
And to be clear, and the report is very clear on this, we are not shaming medication here.
Not at all.
Medication saves lives, full stop. But for mild depression or for preventing relapse is the argument that we are overprescribing.
The argument is that we are under-equipping. If the only tool a GP has is prescription pad and they have 10 minutes with a patient, that's what they're going to use. They can't do a full therapy session. The report argues for mindfulness-based interventions as a non-stigmatizing, non-invasive, and crucially evidence-based alternative.
And this isn't just some fringe idea. Nice, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which is basically the gold standard for medical guidelines in the UK, is backing this up.
Yes. The 2022 guidelines from NICE now explicitly recommend mindfulness for people with mild depression and MBCT specifically for preventing relapse. That is a massive policy shift. It moves mindfulness out of the alternative medicine category and into the standard of care category.
So where do they want to deploy this? It's not just in hospitals or therapy rooms?
No, they're calling for it to be embedded in primary care through this concept of social prescribing. So your doctor might actually prescribe a local cycling club or a mindfulness course instead of, or maybe alongside, a pill.
I love that idea. Take 2 meditations and call me in the morning.
Exactly. But also in workplaces. The NICE guidelines recommend it for mental well-being strategies for employees and, very importantly, in what they call blue light services.
Police, ambulance, firefighters, the people who are dealing with extremely high trauma on a daily basis.
Exactly. The armed forces already use it to some extent, and the logic is clear. These people are under extreme cognitive and emotional load. They need the brain upgrade we talked about in Section 1, the executive attention, the inhibition to stay safe and make good decisions under pressure, and they need the debugging from Section 2 to help prevent PTSD and burnout.
It seems like a no-brainer. But the report also touches on this issue of equity and access.
This is critical because right now, mindfulness is often seen as a luxury wellness product. You go to a fancy retreat in Bali, you pay for an expensive annual app subscription. The evidence emphasizes that if this is going to be a public health tool, it must reach the groups who are at highest risk, those in poverty, those with chronic health conditions who often have the least access to it. It shouldn't just be for the wealthy, worried well.
It needs to be democratic. It needs to be accessible to everyone.
It needs to be systemic. It needs to be available in community centers, in schools, in local clinics, and be free at the point of use.
Okay, so let's try to bring this all together. Section 5. Synthesis. We have covered a lot of ground here.
We really have. It's been a marathon.
If we try to connect the dots,
Yeah.
we've got the head, the heart, and the health system.
In the head. You get accuracy and inhibition, you stop the autopilot errors, you clear out that working memory cache, you train the bouncer at the door of your mind.
In the heart, you learn to manage the stress response, and crucially, you gain the self-control to break powerful addictions like smoking, which directly protects your vascular system. You train the pause.
And in the health system, you offer a scalable non-drug tool that can reduce our reliance on long-term medication and prevent relapse, potentially saving billions and dramatically improving quality of life. You treat the society.
It's a really cohesive narrative when you lay it all out. It's all about regulation. Regulating attention, regulating emotion, regulating behavior, from the neuron all the way up to the nation.
And there is that one thread that ran through all of these different sources that I want to highlight again, and that's the face-to-face factor.
Yes. The cognitive study said face-to-face beat the apps. The Rumination Review found that online MBCT wasn't as effective as the in-person or the hybrid versions.
We live in a digital age, and we want digital solutions for everything. But the data consistently suggests that for this kind of mental training, the human element, the group dynamic, the teacher, the accountability is a kind of secret sauce. You can't fully automate wisdom.
That is a really important takeaway for anyone listening. If you've tried an app and felt like it didn't work for you, maybe you didn't fail. Maybe you just need a human.
Exactly. We are social creatures. We actually regulate each other's nervous systems just by being in a room together. Learning to self-regulate often starts with co-regulation in a group.
So as we wrap up, this has been quite a journey. We started with this idea of a gym for the brain.
And we found that the gym equipment is surprisingly effective, but maybe not in the way we expected.
Right. It's not about floating away on a cloud or achieving some mystical state. It's about cognitive training. It's about accuracy over speed. It's about breaking the loop of I am a failure and replacing it with I am having a thought.
And it's about a potential revolution in public health.
Before we sign off, I just want to leave you with one final thought. We talked about that key finding right at the beginning, that mindfulness improves accuracy, not speed. And this raises a really important, maybe even uncomfortable question for our modern lives. We're obsessed with speed. We want to read faster, work faster, reply faster, think faster. But all this data suggests that this constant rush degrades our cognitive performance. We make more errors. We get stuck in mental loops.
We're optimizing for the wrong thing.
So if mindfulness makes us slower,
If it makes us slower, but more accurate, less reactive, more decentered, is it actually the antidote to the entire attention economy? Perhaps the goal shouldn't be to think faster at all. Perhaps the real goal is to think better. And maybe thinking better requires us to slow down.
that is something to chew on. Are you sacrificing accuracy for speed in your own life, at work, in your relationships? And what would happen if you deliberately chose accuracy instead?
It might just change everything.
It might.
Thank you for diving deep with us today.
It was a pleasure.
See you next time.